going back now. There ain't no 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 going back now. Yeah, I'm ready to brawl.
The Bokur Brawl may be in the books, but we are back talking about it and all of the lovely data that we now have from the event. So the Brawl was, by all accounts, phenomenal. I was not there, but was following daily and getting updates direct from players. So I want to take a look at a deep dive into the numbers here, as it tells us a couple of little tidbits. So first off, I want to congratulate Seth and Steve Rabideau and the NJSOP crew for putting on a phenomenal event. As always, they should be super proud. They had 18 teams, 90 individual players for the team tournament itself, over 100 unique players across all of the events. An IG qualifier with 24 players in it at 75 points, 2 big base brawls, pods each with 16 players. Really, really strong set of events over the weekend. So let's talk about the team tournament. It was won, of course, by Double Decker Steve Sandwich. Was there any doubt ever? It was a little bit. OK Boomhowler in second. Our fine neighbors to the north, 1F by land, 2F by snow, came in third, and in fourth place was 5-Star Syndicate. So I want to deep dive the overall numbers at the event and see what we can learn from them. So a couple of baseline numbers. There were 57 games played with New Signar, 57 games played with New Dusk, and 54 games played with New Orgoth. Those are the ones that I'm going to look at as statistically significant from a sampling size. Again, because that within the event is a majority of play. We can probably glean something from the 35 games that Brian Bloods played and the 35 games that New Khador played, but I don't want to put too much stock into those. Again, any of these numbers are essentially event specific. It's one of the things that we do need to look at. One of the more interesting tidbits is there were 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There were 21 different old school factions played, old school armies played, which is very interesting in the Brawl. And I think it's important in a team tournament, particularly now, to have access within the team to an old army or two. So let's talk about composition of the winning teams. Again, we talked about this a little bit before. You can go back to the episodes, but I do just want to revisit them at the top 3. So within the top 3, at number 1, you've got Dusk, Signar, New Khador, Storm Knight Signar, and Orgoth Sea Raiders. In second place, you have Ravens of War with Shadowflame Shard, Orgoth, Dusk, and Brian Bloods. And then in third, you have New Signar with Ravens of War, Double, New Khador, and Brian Bloods. So what does this tell us? Well, this tells us that the new armies are highly adaptable. That's something we've kind of already known. The cadres have made them that much more, along with the Apotheosis casters. And within the statistical data that we're about to get into, you'll kind of see that a bit more. So again, jumping into everybody's favorite win rate, at 90% for the event and 10 games played was Ravens of War, a single loss across the 2 players that played them. Again, both very accomplished Legion players, one of which is JVM, so him performing very well, not out of the question. More interesting, again in small sample size, is Thornfall Alliance with 1 player going 4-1. They were able to get the pigs into great matchups. The pig player executed exceedingly well, and by all accounts was utilized very well by their team. Also notable is Infernals with 19 games played had a 74% win rate. They won 14 out of their 19 games across the 4 players that played, and I think one of them dropped at the very end. So we didn't get the full 20 games, but 14 wins and 5 losses for Infernals. So pretty significant win rate across the 4 players. But again, not something I deem statistically significant. Our first statistical significant stat here is with 54 games played, Orgoth had a 70% win rate for the event. 38 wins, 16 losses. Obviously, the teams are able to manipulate that rate up a little bit because of keeping Orgoth away from poor matchups as best they can. And a lot of very, very good players are on Orgoth. Again, each of the top 3 teams had an Orgoth player in them. I'm sorry, each of the top 2 had an Orgoth player. The top 3, the third team did not. Canada went double Khador. So back into the numbers we go. Our next statistically significant win rate is at number 8 for the event is House Callus or Dusk. 57 games played, 31 wins, 26 losses, a 54% win rate on the event. Very, very solid win rate. And about what you would expect most of the factions to be in. I don't think that Dusk was able to be covered as well as Orgoth was in terms of getting into advantageous matchups nearly as much. I think Dusk played a lot of very hard games very well throughout the weekend. Again, it's a statistically significant data point to look at and consider. Wintercore was also very interesting on the weekend. 35 games played in the Brawl, and 17 wins, 17 losses, 1 draw for a pure 50% win rate. So they didn't do bad, they didn't do poorly, they just were kind of there. They're reliable with the win rate. You can take with that what you will. There were 2 on the third place team, and there was 1 on the winning team. And then right behind them at 46% rate and 57 games played was Storm Legion. Storm Legion had 26 wins to 30 losses, 1 draw for a 46% overall event win rate. Pretty interesting there. I would have pegged them for around 50%. They're slightly under the 50% rate in the event. I think Storm Legions has some very good builds, and I think it has some builds that are probably not ready for a team event. I'm going to be interested to dive into their casters here and kind of see if what I'm thinking is there was some significant winners in win rate and some significant losers in win rate. But we'll see if we've got enough of them in one category or the other to make any determinations even for the event. Rhinebloods had 35 games played. They come in at number 14 overall, 15 wins, 20 losses, 43% win rate. This is a lot lower than I thought it was going to be. But we do see Rhinebloods as part of the composition in the top 3. So it is kind of a stark contrast here. But I do think there were some players that were playing incredibly well with Rhinebloods and some other players that were having less than stellar days with Rhinebloods. And I think that's kind of not an indictment of the faction by any means. I think that is a faction that is going to attract a wide scope of players to it. If you're playing Rhinebloods, it may be for tactical advantage, or it may be because you really like the minis, and both are completely valid reasons to play them. And then one more that I will note from a interesting standpoint, or purely interesting standpoint, is Shadowflame Shard with 23 games played, 7 wins, 16 losses, 30% win rate. Most of those wins coming from OK Boomers, Jeff Fredrickson having an absolute phenomenal Bokur Brawl with Shadowflame Shard. And we'll dive into sort of the breakdown of each of these statistically significant samples now. So let's look at Sea Raiders. Now, one thing to note, not all of the games had the caster recorded. So some of these are going to be a little light, but some of these are not going to be surprising. Morgoth had about half its games not report caster. But in the ones that did report, we have 19 games for Harusk with 18 wins and 1 loss, a 95% win rate. Not surprising to me. Harusk is very good. He's incredibly good in a team environment. I would probably say you double each of these numbers, and that's probably the play percentages and play rates. Sabrith had 6 games. She was 5-1, 83% win rate. Again, not surprising. Very good. Oriax was 1-1, about what you would expect. And then Kishtar had 1 game for 1 loss that was recorded. And again, we're missing about half the games here. So again, I would just safely say you double each of those amounts, and you probably still have a similar rate of win for each of those players. So Harusk and Sabrith are the cream of the faction, and I don't think we can argue otherwise. They play the game in a way that just significantly warps the overall meta. And warps their ability to do things. So yes, we do see that Sea Raiders are probably the best army currently, at least at the Bokur Brawl. It'll be interesting to see if any of this holds up as more cadres come through. So again, be interesting to see how that continues to secure and evolve. I do wish we had full reporting statistics for the casters, kind of breaking down the how of the wins. They had a 92%, or Orgoth had a 92% win rate when going first, 53% win rate when going second. In the games recorded, Orgoth had 11 games into Dusk and had an 82% win rate. So one of the things we know about this event is that Cyrafel was in nearly every Dusk pairing, as was Helith, and neither of those ended up holding up very well into Orgoth. So looking at the matchup specifically, we have 6 games recorded with Harusk into the faction. He was 99% win rate. Again, unsurprising, likely into Seraphel. Also into Helith, he performs exceedingly well. And again, in both of those, or in the recorded events that we have into Orgoth, we have 4 games for Helith and 3 games for Seraphel. And all of those were wins for Orgoth. Again, I wish we had full reporting. The only other faction of note is 8 of the games were mirrors, so that provides a 50% win rate, and then 8 of the games were into New Signar, and New Signar had a 50% win rate into us. And then there were 5 games into Shadowflame Shard. Orgoth was winners in each of those, and then 3 games into New Orgoth, into New Gador, and Orgoth won 100% of those games. Interesting note, in the 5 games played, we have record for 3 of them in terms of casters. On the Shadowflame Shard side, they went Shyrus. And in the Orgoth side, each of those was played by Sabrith. And Sabrith won 100% of those games that had the casters recorded. On the New Kador side, for Winter Core, again, out of the 3 games, we have 1 game with a recorded caster. For each, it was Harusk into Sakura. And again, that was a win for Harusk. So that is Sea Raiders by the numbers in the event. Again, I wish we had more complete caster reporting, and I wish we had more complete first and second reporting. So let's jump into Dust House Callus. So again, 57 games played. Here we have about 42 of the games, about 45 of the games recorded with a caster. So significantly better reporting on the House Callus side. But still missing about 13 games, but we can glean better information here. Tyrus was 3-1 on the event with 4 games played for 75% win rate. He takes the top of the House Callus. win rate by percentage. By play rate, it's Heleth. Heleth had 27 games recorded, 16 wins, 11 losses for a 59% performance. Seraphel, a little disappointing, 10 games, 3 wins, 7 losses, 30% win rate. And Hazaroth had 1 game played with 1 loss. So let's jump into the deep dive on the analysis. All right, so interesting here for the event, House Callus had 57 games reported with first and second. 54% of the time they won going first, and 55% of the time they won going second. The top caster win rate again was Heleth with 27 games played and a 59% win rate. So let's get into the numbers on the factions. House Callus into Signar, particularly Storm Legion, had a 63% win rate over 8 games. They had 4 games where they went first, was about a 50-50 match. In the games in which House Callus went second, they were a 75% win rate, also 8 games. We have 1 caster recorded into Signar for 1 game, which was Heleth with 1 win. And then the opposing caster reported theirs in 5 games. They had 4 games with Spark Hammer, and they were 2-2 in those games, so 50% win rate. And then House Callus won. Calder was dropped once into House Callus, at least in the recording standpoint, and lost to Dusk. So pretty interesting there. They were 50-50 in the 2 games against Shadowflame Shard. They had 5 games into New Khador. New Khador, they were a 40% win rate into New Khador. So New Khador seems to have, at least in this event, a slight edge into Dusk. And again, 40% win rate. We don't have great reporting from the Dusk side. We know 3 games where they dropped Heleth, and they only won 1 of those games. There was 1 game for Baronova, 1 game for Boris, and 1 game for Savrin. In each of those games, Khador was the winner. The 1 game that Dusk won, from a caster reporting side, was into Sakura. So interesting there, just from that win rate. Dusk played a lot of the older factions in their games, but they were onesie twosies. They mopped up against Old Signar, into Infernals, into 5th Division, into Ravens of War, into Dark Operations. They had 3 games and won all 3 games. Same thing with Talion Charter. Both flavors of Ret they had a game into and beat. 2 wins over Army of the Western Reaches. 50% win rate over 2 games into Crucible Guard. They had 6 mirrors for 50% win rate there. And then 4 games into Brine Bloods, and they had a 25% win rate. So Orgoth, Brine Bloods, Khador definitely seem like the fix for at least the mix that was at play at Bokur Brawl, from a Dusk standpoint. I think the only one that's really significant is the 11 games in Orgoth and Dusk performing so poorly into that Orgoth. One interesting note is that Heleth had 4 games into. One interesting note is Heleth had 4 games into Orgoth and lost every single one again. So, and they were 0-6 into Harusk. Any of the games they went second, they had no win chance. From Dusk perspective, they had a 29% win rate if they went first. So going first against Orgoth is critical. Which again, intuitively makes sense to me as an Orgoth player. Orgoth have a hard time recovering space, but if they're able to gather that space initially, it is hard to dislodge them from that space, and then they can start to grind on scenario and outperform in attrition, which is the 2 things they love to do, because they are the take-a-punch faction. All right. 35 games again for Winter Core. We have 22 with a recorded caster. Savern was 6-1 for 86% win rate. Sakura matched for games played with recording for 7, with 3 wins and 4 losses for 43% win rate. Borisk was 2-1. He was dropped 3 times, won 2, lost 1. And then Baranova was 2 and 3, 5 games dropped, and only a 40% win rate. So let's get into those percentages a bit more. New Cater was 60% when it went first, and 27% win rate when it went second. It had 24 games going first and 11 games going second. It had 9 games into Signar and won 61% of those games, specifically Storm Legion. It also had 2 games into Storm Knights and won both of those games. So in the Storm Legion matchup, we have 9 games reported. We have 61% overall win rate, 64% win rate for Kaor when going first, 50% win rate when going second. They went first 7 games, went second 2 games. They lost Kaor won the one game that was reported for Sakura. They had a 0% win rate into Wolf with 1 game played into him. They won 67% of the time in the 3 games played into Sparkhammer, so they went 2 and 1 into Sparkhammer. They had 1 game into Calder and beat Calder each time. So that is Kator by the numbers. Let's jump over into Storm Legion. Storm Legion, we got about 2/3 of the games reported with Caster. 4 games for Wolf. Wolf was 4 and 0. 2 games for Huxley. He was 1 and 1. 4 games for Athena DeBarro, 2 and 2. 27 games for Sparkhammer, far and away the most played caster at the event. For Signar, or for Storm Legion, 12 wins, 15 losses, 44% win rate. Calder had 3 games played. She dropped 3 times. She lost every game. So let's get into the nitty gritty on Storm Legion. Again, 57 games played, a 46% overall win rate, and 18 games were recorded where they went first. They won 69% of those. 39 games where they went second, only a 36% win rate. Huxley, again, had a 50% win rate, personal win rate. Barrow, 50% win rate. Wolf had a near 100%, or had a 99% win rate with 4 games played and 4 wins. And then Sparkhammer, 44% win rate on 27 games. Signar played itself in the mirror 8 times, 50% win rate there. 8 games into Orgoth, also notable 50-50 rate. In the Orgoth match, again, not significant reporting. Sparkhammer was played 4 times, won half the games. DeBarro was dropped once, lost that game. And they played into Harusk 4 times, only won 1 of those games. Played into Oriax once, they won that. Signar won that game. They had a 99% win rate going first. Signar did, and a 20% win rate going second. Again, not surprising based on how Orgoth performed when going first. They had the most games into Kador, and they only had a 38% win rate into Kador. So let's look at Signar's performance into Kador, Winter Core specifically. Again, 9 games, 39% win rate. They had a 75% win rate when going first. Signar did, but only 2 times did they go first. 29% win rate when going second in the 7 games. Wolf performed well. He had 1 win. Sparkhammer did not perform very well into Kador, 1 and 2. And again, Savrin did not perform overly well into Signar. Savrin performed very well into Signar, 2 and 1. With Signar only picking up 1 win against him. Into Boris, it was 50-50. So, bit of interest there. Then jumping over to Dusk, 8 games played. Again, Signar only able to pick up 38% win rate in Dusk. When Signar went first, it had 8 games. 1 game it went first. The other 7 games it went second. When Signar went first, it had a 100% win rate. When Signar went second, it had a 29% win rate. Sparkhammer had it 4 games into Dusk and was 50% into them. 1 game was played into Helith, and that was a loss for Signar. Signar was 50% into Seraphel, and Seraphel, at least on the reported games, Seraphel won 1 and lost 1, and then they were 50% into Tyrus with a win 1 and lost 1. They did have 3 games into Shadowflame Shard, and Signar was able to win each of those. Signar had 1 game where they went first and 1, and 2 games where they went second and 1. Sparkhammer had 2 of the games recorded out of the 3. He won each of his. 2 2 of the games were into Cyrus, and 1 of the game was into Rask, and they won each time. So that is Storm Legion for the event. Let's jump over to Brian Bloods. Brian Bloods, 35 games played. We've got, again, about 20-some games recorded. Ragemonger played in 10 of the games. That was the most played caster from a recorded standpoint. Brian Bloods, he went 6-4. The 60% win rate on the day. Shadow Tongue was 4-4 with 8 games played for 50%. Fire Quill was 2-2, also 50%. And Thorga Boomhowler with 5 games played was 2-3 on the day. Jumping into the deeper patterns. 35 games, 43% win rate. Brian Bloods went first in 16 games. They had a 56% win rate going first. They had a 32% win rate going second in 19 games. Again, top 2 casters were Ragemonger with a 60% win rate, 10 games played, and Shadow Tongue with 8 games recorded for a 50% win rate. So where did they pick up the most games? Again, 4 games into Brian Bloods for a 50% win rate. They had a 75% win rate into Dusk in the 4 games that they played. So in those 4 games, 3 of those games, they were able to go first into Dusk and had 67% win rate into Dusk when going first. They had 1 game going second, and they won that game. So 100% when going second, but again, only 4 games recorded. They had a 100% win rate into Cyrus, or Shadow Tongue, and a 100% win rate into Dusk. There were 2 games into Helith with a 50/50 result, so 1-1, and they were able to win 100% of their games into Seraphel. So, at least in this small sample size, the Brian Blood Killer was not quite the Brian Blood Killer that you'd think it would be. Morgoth, however, some pretty mighty struggles. 3 games, only 1 win. Not a great amount of games to get upset about one way or the other. Interesting tidbit was if Brian Bloods were able to go first, they had a 50% win rate. They had 2 games where they went first, and they won 1 of them. In the 1 game that they went second, they lost. Again, 2 of the games they dropped Ragemonger. It was 1-1 in those games. They lost the game that they played into Sabrith. They lost the 1 game that they played into Rusk, and they won the 1 game that they played into Kishtar. Again, not surprising being a Morgoth player. That was how that result plays out. They did have 4 games into Ravens of War, and they lost all of those games. 1 game into Signar, they lost that. They had 2 games into Kador. They won each of those games into Wintercore. And had 1 game they went first, 1 game they went second. And Ragemonger and Shadow Tongue each recorded a win. And they were against Sikora and Baranova, respectively. 50/50 into Shadowflame Shard. We don't have the caster recorded here from the Blind Blood standpoint. We do know that Cyrus was played in 1 of those 2 games, and it was the game that Blind Bloods won. And then finishing it off with a slight look into Shadowflame Shard. 23 games played. We have 12 recorded with who the caster was. Nixian was 1-0 in recorded game. Cyrus was had 10 games, had 1 win and 9 losses. And Rask had 1 recorded game, and it was a loss. So again, 23 games played. They went first about 15 games. They had a 27% win rate when going first. They had 8 games going second. They had a 38% win rate in games going second. Of armies of note, they had 5 games into Sea Raiders. They lost each of those games. And we're 50/50 into Dusk and 50/50 into Brian Bloods, but again, only 2 games each of those played. 3 games into Storm Legion, dropped all 3 of those games. Not a lot we can glean here from a win rate perspective for Shadowflame, so not significant enough data, but there was 1 on the winning team. I wish we had more of the casters recorded for this faction, because it would give better overall data, and we could have a better discussion around it. Okay, so what does all this mean? What did we learn? Well, I think Bokur may have changed my personal opinion on first and second. in 2024. I think the large consensus was you needed to go second more often than not, and now I think it is very much being illustrated that because of how live these scenarios can be, and because it is about scoring on your opponent's turn to win and not your turn, that it is actually more advantageous to score second, which means you go first and take space. Take space, being a spot to contest, being a spot to dictate the pace of battle, and going first will reward you immensely. And again, we see that in nearly every statistically significant sample that we have. And Orgoth, with 54 games played, 24 of those games they went first, and they had a 92% win rate in those games. You look again at House Callus, again Dusk, 57 games played, 26 of those games they went first with a 54% win rate. Winter Core, 35 games played, 24 of those games they went first and they had a 60% win rate. Going second, they had 11 games, 27% win rate. And then Storm Legion, again, 57 games played. They had 18 games where they went first. Of those 18 games, they won 69% of them. When they went second, 39 games, only a 36% win rate. So I think the narrative that going second is the play is incorrect. I think there are specific scenarios where it may be better to go second, but I think generally you want to go first this edition if you are playing one of the new armies. And I think Bokur is essentially bearing that out, proving that out. Again, smaller sample size, but with Brian Bloods, 35 games. They had 16 games where they went first, 56% win rate, 19 games where they went second, 32% win rate. The rule to go first is very important, and one of the things that is very evident is that side was not a determinant factor in the match. And I say that because if it was, we would expect to see closer to 50-50% win rates in first and second if it was that significant of a difference. So those are my thoughts. A couple other of my thoughts. Again, congratulations to all of the winners, especially Steve Sandwich. Always fun when you work so hard to get the event set. You end up being a WTC captain, and then you go ahead and win the event outright. The overall team record was 21-4 in terms of individual games. So only 4 losses for the team is really impressive. They dominated throughout the day, or throughout the 2-day event. And again, Double Decker Steve was comprised of Dusk, Signar, Winter Core, Storm Knights, and Orgoth. And then second place, OK Boom Howler, again, Ravens of War, Shadowflame Shard, Orgoth, Dusk, and Brine Bloods. And then our Canadian friends with Storm Legion, Ravens of War, Double Kador, and Brine Bloods. So thank you for listening. Enjoy, and we'll be back soon.